with us on virtually. Our committee meets today to discuss the importance of our strategic alliance with the freely associated states of the federal states of Micronesia, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, and the Republic of Palau, and negotiating the expiring provisions of the Compacts of Free Association. There's broad consensus between Republicans and Democrats and the administration of the growing importance of the Indo-Pacific region to American security and the need to prioritize our relationship with the freely associated states. While our attention remains focused on Putin's atrocious actions in Ukraine, we must not turn a blind eye to the potentially severe consequences of China's continued aggression toward Taiwan and the Indo-Pacific region at large. Central to the compacts include economic assistance provisions and access to certain federal programs and services, like the U.S. Postal Service, that are set to expire in 2023 for the Marshall Islands and Micronesia and in 2024 for Palau. It remains in America's best interest to expedite these negotiations to demonstrate our loyalty to these special allies and our longstanding commitment to maintaining peace and security in this region. Senator Barrasso and I have sent Secretary Ronald and Secretary Blinken 2 letters urging the administration to expedite the compact negotiation process in light of our national security interest. The administration shared some good news last week. Ambassador Yoon was appointed as Special Presidential Envoy for compact negotiations, and I am optimistic that his appointment marks a new chapter in our efforts to renew the compacts of the Free Association. In considering the compact's renewal, we must not forget the longstanding relationship formed between the United States and the people of the freely associated states in the aftermath of World War II. The compacts of free association emerged as an extension of the United States United Nations Trusteeship Agreement, which recognizes the strategic importance of the Pacific Islands. It allowed the United States to establish an unrestricted military presence on the islands and in the surrounding waters, which cover an area larger than the continental United States, to prevent future aggressions in the region. In return, the trusteeship obligated the United States to foster the economic development and self-sufficiency of the islands and to promote the well-being of their people. The UN trusteeship eventually dissolved, replaced by the Compacts of Free Association, which allows the United States to maintain defense and security rights in exchange for economic assistance to the Marshall Islands, Micronesia, and Palau. Today, the freely associated states' economies face immense challenges, including limited natural and human resources, remote locations, poor infrastructure, pandemic recovery, and assorted environmental issues. All 3 nations rely on the key services and financial assistance that we have provided in the compacts for over 35 years. The compacts are scheduled to have provided $2.5 billion to the Marshall Islands by 2023, $3.7 billion to Micronesia by 2023, and $803 million to Palau by 2024. Compact funding has primarily supported healthcare and education in the freely associated states, but has also helped fund infrastructure projects, disaster response and recovery, and more. To put it plainly, we cannot afford to abandon the freely associated states nor our strategic military presence in the Indo-Pacific, given the threat of our current adversaries. China has long been leveraging its economic power to undermine the autonomy of countries throughout the Pacific region by offering easy money, then applying coercive economic policies. The Marshall Islands are one of China's top priority recipients, and China is a significant source of foreign aid to Micronesia. In 2017, Beijing essentially banned Chinese tourists from visiting Palau, whose economy is heavily reliant on tourism. The United States must be proactive in coming to the negotiation table to maintain our alliance in the Indo-Pacific and to ensure these countries remain economically free from coercive strategies. We must not send the signal to China that the freely associated states are an opportunity to expand their authoritarian interest and influence. Given our interest in maintaining strong and close relationships with the freely associated states, our defense interest, and our interest in deterring China's expansion in the Pacific, this committee has a responsibility to look ahead to the problems that may arise if the financial assistance afforded by the compacts comes to an end. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses from the Department of Interior, the Department of State, the Department of Defense regarding their plans to coordinate an expedited negotiation process that shows the freely associated states and China that they are a top U.S. priority. I want to thank the administration officials for being here with us today to help us learn more about this issue. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Senator Barrasso for his opening remarks.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for holding this important hearing, and thanks to the witnesses who are joining us today. Today is really a great opportunity to discuss the strategic importance of our freely associated states in the Indo-Pacific region. They play a vital role in our deterrence of an even and ever more aggressive China. The war in Ukraine has raised the alarm to the world. We're seeing a shifting of the global world order as we know it. A belligerent and hostile Russia has reminded Europe that the world is not a peaceful place. Security, peace, and stability can no longer be taken for granted there. At the same time, aggressive countries like China with larger global ambitions are watching. They're watching to upset the security and power dynamic in the region and to threaten Taiwan. Can't take their actions lightly. We should do all that we can to deter them from taking the same course as Russia. The compacts of free association that we have with the freely associated states of the Marshall Islands, Micronesia, and Palau are a key part in that deterrence. These island nations and our U.S. territories of Guam, the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, and American Samoa, they form an important line of support and defense for the U.S. and our allies in the Pacific. The military assets and personnel that we currently have stationed on these islands, they do and help provide stability. So will our future plans for additional facilities and assets. The compacts of the Free Association facilitate these strong bonds. They are critical to continuing our historically strong relationships with these nations. The administration has stated they understand the priority of the compacts in their recently released Indo-Pacific strategy of the United States. In its Indo-Pacific strategy, the administration stated, quote, "We will also prioritize negotiations on our compacts of free association with the freely associated states as the bedrock," they say, "of the U.S. role in the Pacific." However, as Chairman Manchin and I have noted in our recent letter to the administration, to date, despite these statements by the administration, there has been no formal compact negotiation meeting between any of the FAS and the administration since the year 2020, meaning none with the Biden administration. Actions speak louder than words, as the chairman has said. China is on the move. Time is running out when renewing the expiring provisions of these compacts. The agencies before us today, the Departments of Interior and State, as well as the Department of Defense, need to work together to get these negotiations back on track. Now is not the time to send a signal to our adversaries that the U.S. doesn't consider the freely associated states a strategic priority. We cannot allow China to forge stronger ties with these nations at our expense and at the expense of our allies. The people of the freely associated states have stood by us as steadfast allies. They expect in return that their priorities are heard. With the three agencies before us today, it's my hope, Mr. Chairman, that we can get a better sense of what's being done to deter China and what the barriers are to moving forward with these compact negotiations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to the testimony.
Thank you, Senator Barrasso. And I'd like to turn to our witnesses now, and we're going to begin with Mr. Lambert, who is Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Bureau of East Asian and Pacific Affairs with the Department of State. He would then be followed by Dr. Mohandas, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for East Asian and Department of Defense. And finally, we're going to hear from Mr. Nakua, Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Insular and International Affairs with the Department of Interior. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. And Mr. Lambert, we'll start with you.
Thank you very much, Senator. Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to testify on the importance of the freely associated states, both to the United States as well as to our allies and partners in the Indo-Pacific region. I'm very pleased to be here today with Deputy Assistant Secretary Keone Nakoa of the Department of Interior and Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for East Asia, Dr. Siddharth Mohandas. As the most dynamic and fastest growing demographic area on Earth, the Indo-Pacific is a vital region. The Indo-Pacific Strategy, the first regional strategy released by the administration, reflects renewed U.S. commitment to deepen our engagement in the region and build innovative links with local allies, partners, and institutions so we can collectively address the urgent challenges that face the Pacific Islands. As was pointed out, our relationships with the Republic of the Marshall Islands, the Federated States of Micronesia, and the Republic of Palau collectively referred to as the freely associated states, have since World War II contributed to a secure, stable, and prosperous Western Pacific, and a strategic location for the United States in the larger Indo-Pacific region. Reflecting the unique and long-standing relationship between the United States and the freely associated states, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services provided the FAS with enough vaccines for their entire populations, as well as personal protective equipment and technical and financial assistance to combat COVID-19. The Republic of the Marshall Islands, Federated States of Micronesia, and Palau are also historically among the United States' strongest supporters at the United Nations. Most recently, all three countries stood alongside the United States and made strong statements at the United Nations in support of Ukraine. It's significant that Micronesia even severed diplomatic relations with Russia. Moreover, Palau and the Marshall Islands are two of the 14 countries that maintain diplomatic ties with Taiwan. These relationships are under enormous pressure from the PRC, as Taiwan has lost 8 diplomatic partners since 2016. In recent years, the PRC has expanded its engagement with the Pacific Islands. Between 2006 to 2018, the PRC provided $1.8 billion in assistance to the Pacific Islands, which would put them third in the region after Australia, which provided $7.7 billion, and the United States, which provided $1.9 billion. That being said, the United States welcomes opportunity to collaborate with partners, including even the PRC, if our interests and development goals overlap in the Pacific Islands. The Biden-Harris administration is prioritizing compact negotiations with the Federated States of Micronesia, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, and Palau as a U.S. foreign policy objective. We are coordinating closely across our interagency to evaluate a range of options to promote continuing assistance to all three countries. As Senator Manchin pointed out, in light of the critical nature of these complex negotiations, President Biden appointed retired Ambassador Joseph Yun as the Special Presidential Envoy for Compact Negotiations on March 22nd. Ambassador Yun has more than 33 years of diplomatic experience, including as our country's Special Representative for North Korea policy and as the United States Ambassador to Malaysia. The U.S. Compact team is focused on continuing with productive talks in order to complete these negotiations in a timely fashion. To date, the negotiation team has consulted on subsidiary agreements under the Compact with each of the freely associated states, covering certain federal programs and services and direct economic assistance contingent on the availability of funding. The U.S. Compact team has held numerous negotiations and discussions with representatives from the Federated States of Micronesia, and U.S. officials remain eager and ready to engage with the Marshall Islands, particularly with respect to provisions that expire after fiscal year 2023 and have sought associated discussions. Likewise, with Palau, we remain ready to engage in the required compact review that already is broad in scope and flexible, and we are also ready to resume negotiations on possible assistance after FY 2024, that is in the case of the Federated States of Micronesia and Republic of Marshall Islands, has been a core element of the overall compact relationship. As part of our most recent engagement efforts, we have proposed in-person meetings with each country to further negotiations and address issues that remain. As I noted, negotiators seek to complete negotiations in a timely fashion, understanding that Congress needs sufficient time to enact legislation as needed before any agreements amending the compacts are brought into force, and to provide Congress the opportunity to appropriate funds to avoid any lapses in assistance. To that end, we look forward to engaging with Congress as negotiations progress. We understand that successful negotiations are crucial to deepening our strategic partnership with Pacific Island countries in support of a free, open, and secure Indo-Pacific. Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to appear before you today, and we look forward to working closely with Congress to ensure that our country can effectively secure U.S. interests in the Indo-Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert. Now we're going to hear from Dr. Mohandas. Doctor, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, distinguished members of the committee. My name is Dr. Siddharth Mohandas, and I serve as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for East Asia, and I'm pleased to have the opportunity to testify before you today alongside Das Lambert from State and Das Nakoa of Interior. The United States is an Indo-Pacific nation with deep linkages with our partners in the Pacific Islands region. We share a unique and special relationship with this critical crossroads of the Indo-Pacific. Forged on the World War II Pacific campaign battlefields of Guadalcanal, Tarawa, and Peleliu, we share a history defined by sacrifice. Today, our peoples value democracy, freedom, and human rights. We share the same profound concerns over the existential threat from climate change and seek opportunities to build prosperous and healthy societies. Last August, when the President of the Republic of Palau, President Serangil Whips, visited Secretary Austin at the Pentagon, he remarked that the United States and Palau are like family. Our Pacific Island family matters greatly to the United States, and nowhere is as critical as the freely associated states of Palau, Micronesia, and the Marshall Islands. When Secretary Austin met with President Whips, he said that the Department of Defense was committed to upholding the U.S. responsibility and authority for defense and security matters in and related to Palau and the other freely associated states. The Department will work with each of the freely associated states on addressing the most pressing and defense and security needs. As we engage with and partner with Palau, Micronesia, and the Marshall Islands, the Compacts of Free Association communicate our long-term commitment to our Pacific Island partners. Another unique aspect of the freely associated states is their commitment to and service in the U.S. military. They've served alongside us in every major conflict, and we at the Department of Defense are profoundly grateful for that. The Compacts of Free Association with each of the freely associated states facilitate an unprecedented strategic partnership with our Palauan, Micronesian, and Marshallese partners. The United States has responsibility and authority for defense and security matters and greatly values the unique access, basing, and overflight afforded us in each of these countries. The compacts also allow the United States the right to strategically foreclose such access, basing, and overflight to third country militaries. In an era of intensifying geopolitical competition, this is vital to U.S. national security interests. The Department of Defense is supporting our interagency partners as the U.S. government seeks to negotiate amendments to allow for the continued provision of certain economic assistance, including federal programs and services that would otherwise expire to the freely associated states. The Department of Defense has a vested interest in seeing the successful and mutually beneficial completion of the negotiations so that we can continue to bolster our strategic partnership with each of the freely associated states. Now, the United States is not the only nation that recognizes the significance of the strategic geography of Palau, Micronesia, and the Marshall Islands. The People's Republic of China is seeking to expand its influence in the freely associated states, and the PRC is increasing its concerning activities throughout the Pacific Islands region. From illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing to outright bullying of sovereign nations that have diplomatic ties with Taiwan, the PRC's provocative behavior appears to be focused on seeking to erode the U.S. strategic partnership with the freely associated states. The Compacts of Free Association are an important signal to both our partners as well as our competitors that the U.S. commitment to the freely associated states is ironclad. U.S. security cooperation activities and investments in the freely associated states are mutually beneficial and advance strategic partnerships with each of our countries. These include security assistance aimed at building partner capacity, as well as our civic action team in Palau, which for the past 50 years has provided rotational detachments of engineers and medical teams that have promoted people-to-people ties through community relations and programs. We also conduct a number of exercises jointly and through services in Palau and other freely associated states. The Pacific Islands also present opportunities for increased cooperation with our closest allies and partners. Australia, New Zealand, Japan, France, and others all share our interest in the region's strategic importance, and we will find ways to leverage our comparative advantages to further strengthen our capacity building activities in the region. For example, in 2020, the United States, Australia, and Japan partnered to finance an undersea cable project for Palau. We have also cooperated with Australia on enhancing maritime domain awareness and seeking ways to ensure that we do that in a complementary fashion. I must also note that the Compacts of Free Association enable key defense posture initiatives in the Indo-Pacific region. The Republic of the Marshall Islands hosts the Ronald Reagan Ballistic Missile Defense Test Site at U.S. Army Garrison Kwajalein Atoll. This site conducts regular space operations to provide space situational awareness and the protection of key space assets supporting 3 geographic combatant commands. It is ideally located for the observation of foreign missile launches and facilitates advanced technology testing for DoD. Future cooperation with the Federated States of Micronesia will facilitate agile combat employment for the U.S. Air Force, and the highly anticipated Tactical Multi-Mission Over-the-Horizon Radar, or TACMOR, in Palau will provide the Department of Defense an unprecedented level of situational awareness of the maritime domain in the Indo-Pacific region. Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, distinguished senators and colleagues, thank you again for the opportunity to testify today about the strategic importance of the freely associated states to U.S. national security. I look forward to your questions and will be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mohandas. And now we're going to hear from Mr. Nakoa. I hope you're feeling better, sir, and I understand you weren't able to travel today, but I really appreciate you making the effort to be with us.
Of course, thank you so much. Good morning, Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and honored members of the committee. My apologies for not being able to attend in person as I had planned, but thank you to the committee and to your wonderful staff for the last-minute accommodations. I am Keone Nakoa, Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Interior for Insular and International Affairs. I am deeply honored to be here representing Secretary of the Interior Deb Haaland in today's hearing alongside Das Lambert from State and Das Mohandas from the DoD. I respectfully request that my full written testimony be made a part of the hearing record.
Without objection.
In addition to overseeing the Secretary's duties to the United States, the U.S. territories of American Samoa, CNMI, Guam, and the USVI, I also lead DOI's administration of the Compacts of Free Association between the United States and the Federated States of Micronesia, the FSM, the Republic of Palau, and the Republic of the Marshall Islands, the RMI, collectively the Freely Associated States, or the FAS. DOI partners with other departments and agencies operating in the FAS under the compacts, including State, Defense, FAA, FEMA, USPS, the Department of Education, Energy, Health and Human Services, Homeland Security, the FDIC, the Veterans Affairs, and others. While the last administration began the 3rd round of COFA negotiations in 2020 by emphasizing the strategic importance of the FAS, as the chair and ranking member have highlighted this morning, it was hampered by the determination of some of the FAS to address unresolved issues relating to the current implementation of both the compacts as amended and relevant U.S. law, as well as issues settled in the 1986 compact that the RMI wishes to revive from the 2nd rounds of the COFA negotiations in 2003. At the end of 2020, the U.S. negotiators presented the 3 FAS with non-paper economic proposals that did not address demands from the FAS and lacked provisions from key federal agencies. Those proposals were limited to extending and amending only certain expiring economic assistance provisions with a perceived downgrading of assurance levels for all economic assistance. Moreover, instead of the full faith and credit assurances in the original 1986 compacts or mandatory funding, the current model, all economic assistance was proposed to be funded through discretionary appropriations. The RMI had responded in 2021 to the informal U.S. proposal with a conceptual counterproposal containing a proposed negotiating agenda. The President of Palau, as was noted previously, came to Washington and explained to the U.S. cabinet level officials in 2021 that the 2020 offers were inadequate and unacceptable. While the FSM remains engaged, including informal talks with this team in Honolulu last November, and a discussion with USPS about their current operations in the FSM earlier this month, many of the most complex issues remain, including infrastructure assistance and trust fund management processes. When I assumed my duties as DAS in the fall of 2021 and was assigned to serve as the Interior Department's COFA co-negotiator the RMI and Palau had already refused to continue COFA negotiations without certain conditions being met. Given this history of the 2020 and 2021 negotiations, particularly with Palau and RMI, in 2021, the Biden-Harris COFA team began an intensive review of the policies put in place during the last administration, taking feedback from Congress and the FAS into consideration. As a result of that review, we identified several areas where the U.S. negotiating strategy and expectations of the FAS were misaligned. Specifically, we noted the barriers related to the lack of consideration of mandatory funding proposals to the FAS, the need to appoint a presidential representative, and the need for broader discussion of COFA-related issues respectful of all parties. Today, I'm optimistic and pleased to report to this committee that with recent actions from the Biden-Harris administration, chiefly the naming of Ambassador Joseph Yun as the Special Presidential Envoy for Compact Negotiations on March 22nd, with interagency reach to address a broader range of issues than that of any single department, and the administration's support to request the necessary mandatory funding for implementing the agreements that are reached in the negotiation process, as previewed in the President's budget and brief released yesterday. The administration has taken steps to put the negotiations back on a viable track for timely completion and approval of agreements by the United States and FAS, which is still achievable as long as we have the commitment and cooperation of all three FAS as well as the federal stakeholders to move forward. Although we have not yet worked out every detail of the many complex issues in these negotiations, with a new special presidential envoy, I am hopeful that we can quickly take the initial and necessary step of hearing each other out in a way that allows our countries to raise matters of importance and to find those areas of negotiation on which we do share a mutual understanding very soon. From there, we will need FAS to prepared to provide their own proposals to resume discussions, leading to a new beginning to earnest negotiations. We look forward to the continued engagement from this committee and both chambers of Congress. My written statement also included a historical narrative about the success of the compact. For that success to continue, the FAS need to come forward with their proposals and solutions so we can finish our mission and bring an agreement to Congress in time for you in Congress to be able to do your jobs as well. I believe we can accomplish this mission and pledge support and work with the administration's Special Presidential Envoy and all stakeholders to ensure we do. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And now we have our questions. We'll start with our questions, and I'll begin with mine. And mine's going to be an overreaching statement that I want all three of you to kind of comment on. But basically, knowing what's going on in the region that we're discussing right now on the islands, and how strategic that has been for us for so many years, is there a sense by the people that live there that the United States has not fulfilled its commitment, that they do not have a comfort level with us and are looking at China? Do they understand the gravity of working with China and what that can mean as far as their freedoms of basically making decisions and working in a democratic process and not a committed one because of obligation? I just trying to get a feel for what's going on here, because we see a lot of movement of China, not just there, but all over the world, but especially there, being in their backyard. So if you can just tell me what we're dealing with and what more we can do to give the confidence to the people that we relish and we cherish this relationship. And I hope they don't think we've taken it for granted. So we'll start with Ms. Lambert. We'll just go right down the line, okay? Your honest opinion on what you're saying.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Senator, the Chinese are looking at the Pacific Islands as a vital part of a bigger strategy. It is obvious they are investing in infrastructure development. They're putting people into areas where they traditionally have not, for instance, in the Solomon Islands, going beyond the three countries we're talking about in the FAS. They're also really amping up their diplomatic presence in that region. Part of this is trying to push Taiwan.
Is their reach greater than what ours has been? Or have we basically dropped down to where we're not giving the attention that we said we would or we had in the past?
I wouldn't characterize it that way, sir. I would say that they have upped their game. We need to up our game.
Gotcha.
We are working together. I hope it's evident here by our three agencies are lashed up in a way we need to be. We are looking at ways to amp up our diplomatic presence. You probably saw that when Secretary Blinken was in Fiji last month, he announced our intention to reopen an embassy in the Solomon Islands. We have other plans in the works to expand our diplomatic presence. We're also talking about expanding the offering of federal services to the freely associated states that they've asked for. And I think the message we're sending now is being well received. I am confident that with the announcement of Joe Yoon being the presidential envoy, that we will be engaged in formal negotiations readily. But you're exactly right, sir. We're in a competition, and we need to put our best people forward on it.
Dr. Mohandas, your observation?
Thank you, Chairman Manchin. Let me first just make a comment from a defense perspective and note that one of the several unique aspects of the compacts of free association is that we have, as I noted in my testimony, unrestricted access, basing, and overflight rights in the freely associated states, as well as the right to deny any third countries from developing a military presence in the freely associated states, and that those rights exist in perpetuity. And in return—
Are we enforcing that right now? We're not allowing any one of those islands to basically negotiate with China on any type of activity militarily?
Absolutely, but I should also clarify that they have not attempted to do so either. And in return, we also provide, we provide for their defense, as you note, in a dangerous world. And so I think from that perspective, the U.S. commitment to the freely associated states is ironclad, and it's something that
They feel that way. They feel that our commitment is ironclad.
I do believe that,
And we have not neglected them.
I believe that is the case, and that's what when President Whips came and met with Secretary Austin, he specifically highlighted the importance of our defense relationship and our longstanding defense relationship. But you're absolutely right, Senator, that China is seeking to expand its influence throughout the entire Pacific Islands region, and specifically in the freely associated states, and is offering a number of economic steps to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm at Mr. Coe real quick. I know I'm running over my time here. I'm so sorry to cut you off, sir, but we have time limits.
No problem. I just wanted to say I concur with what Das Lambert just said. We're in a competition with the FAS. But that said, we remain the partner of choice for all three FAS.
You feel that we still have that type of presence there?
We do, and I think that there is a feeling from my meetings with President Whips last week and discussions with the FSM earlier that they would like for the United States to remain the partner of choice. But like Das Lambert said, we need to up our game. And I think that the last recent actions from the administration with Envoy Yoon and mandatory spending do exactly that.
Okay. Thank you all so much. Senator Barrasso.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Mohandas, you talked about the defense relationship. So the Air Force operates 450 Minuteman intercontinental nuclear missiles located in my home state of Wyoming, as well as Montana and North Dakota. Both of those states are also represented with members on this committee. According to the Air Force, a few times a year, a missile without its nuclear warhead is actually pulled from its silo. These missiles are then launched from Vandenberg Air Force Base in California to a test range in the Republic of the Marshall Islands, also known as the Ronald Reagan Test Site. The Minuteman III nuclear missile test launches are conducted on a rotational basis. Wyoming crews from F.E. Warren Air Force Base, as well as crews from North Dakota and Montana Air Force bases. So how important is this Ronald Reagan test site in the Marshall Islands in terms of our, you talk about defense relationships, in terms of our military readiness, and how important are these tests as part of our nuclear deterrence on countries such as China?
Thank you, Senator. The Ronald Reagan test site is vitally important, and it is vitally important for our ballistic missile testing. We test hypersonics there. It is that testing is critical to ensuring the safety and reliability of our nuclear deterrent, as you note, sir. And then the Ronald Reagan test site and Kwajalein Atoll, the garrison there, also are critical for our space situational awareness.
In terms of one of the follow-ups to what Senator Manchin had to say, Dr. Mohandas, your written testimony caught me. I was very interested. It said the People's Republic of China, the PRC, is seeking to expand, it said, its influence in the freely associated states, and the PRC is increasing its, your words, intimidating activities throughout the Pacific Islands region. Can you briefly give some examples as to how China is trying to expand its influence in the freely associated states?
Absolutely, Senator. So first, to be clear, the PRC is seeking to expand its influence throughout the Pacific Islands region because they too perceive it to be a strategic region. With respect to the freely associated states in particular, I would note that Palau and the Republic of the Marshall Islands maintain diplomatic relations with Taiwan, and obviously that is a source of intense focus for the PRC as part of their longstanding effort to reduce Taiwan's international space. And so we have seen, frankly, coercive behavior, including, as Senator Manchin noted, efforts to manipulate tourism numbers, reduce tourism numbers to Palau, and also just generally, I would suggest increase economic dependency on the PRC throughout the freely associated states.
Well, then, over to Mr. Lambert. Along this line, there's a story in the New York Times, you probably saw it, page A6 on Saturday. China close to signing secret security accord with Solomon Islands. And, you know, the article states that if signed, it would give the Prime Minister of the Solomon Islands, quote, the ability to call on China for protection of its own government while granting China a base of operations between the United States and Australia that could be used to block shipping traffic across the South Pacific. So it's clear China has long-term strategy for gaining influence in the Indo-Pacific region, including the freely associated states and their neighbors. Could you briefly give some specific examples of what actions China has already taken to gain influence in the region and how you view the potential security agreement that's reported here in the New York Times between China and the Solomon Islands?
Senator Barrasso, I think the Chinese have a pretty well-established kit bag of leverage that they use, not just in the Pacific Islands, but also in East Asia. You know how they use investment. We've seen in recent years where they punished South Korea after the Republic of Korea deployed the THAAD anti-ballistic missile system by cutting off investment. We saw in Vietnam how after there was a confrontation involving a Chinese oil rig in the waters off of Vietnam, the Chinese used cutting off tourism and cutting off the purchases of agricultural goods from that country to enforce leverage. The same thing is potentially could happen in the Pacific. Dr. Mohandas talked about how reliant these countries are on tourism. Palau in particular gets most of its revenues from tourism. Just because of its geography, many of those tourists are Chinese, and they can be turned on and off with a switch once COVID is behind us. In a similar fashion, as China buys more and more goods from these countries are going to be more and more dependent. We're seeing very heavily leveraged loans in the case of a country like Tonga. Tonga owes a huge amount of its foreign debt to the PRC. That's leverage. These are the types of things that we need to work not just with the freely associated states, but with all the countries in the Pacific through the Pacific Island Forum and with our closest allies and partners like Australia, New Zealand, the UK, France, and Japan to push back.
Even though, then, Mr. Chairman, that we may be the partner of choice due to these leverage and force applications, we may end up in the long term not being the partner that they choose.
Senator, that's what's at risk. I think that's very well said. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. And now we'll have Senator Heinrich.
I think the way that you summed that up, Senator Barrasso, in terms of partner of choice versus the partner that they choose, really gets at what our challenge is in the South Pacific. You know, people brought up issues of the question of, has there been neglect? Have we kept our promises over the years? And I would urge all of our colleagues to spend some time there, to see the capabilities at Kwajalein that you referenced, Senator Barrasso, to see also the impacts to places like Bikini and Eniwetok. According to the government of the Republic of the Marshall Islands, the Nuclear Claims Tribunal has been unable to pay $23 million in personal injury awards, and $2.2 billion in property damage awards due to a lack of funds. The Marshall Islands government regards these unfunded awards as part of, quote, the core of all discussions on nuclear justice, end quote. My father was a witness to 2 of the detonations in the Marshall Islands and paid a pretty steep health cost for his proximity to those, and I can only imagine what the sort of scale of what the Marshallese sacrificed as a result of all that testing. So, Mr. Lambert and Mr. Nakoa, is additional compensation related to past U.S. nuclear weapons testing being discussed in the negotiations of the Marshall Islands? And if not, why not?
Senator, we negotiated a full and final settlement of the nuclear issue with the Marshall Islands several years ago, and the Congress approved that. Nonetheless, we are open to hearing any concerns any of the freely associated states have. Ambassador Yoon will be empowered to hear any concerns that the citizens of these countries have. We will then, of course, need to work closely with colleagues in the administration and in Congress to see what our country could do.
I recognize what we negotiated. I've also seen with my own eyes what the reality on what ground is left is there. This is a place where the culture and the community is really struggling with not only the impacts of that testing, but also the direct impacts of climate change and sea level rise, and those things compound on each other. I do want to ask, Mr. Moandas, can you elaborate a little more on the very acute threat that what I would call pirate fishing, what is often referred to as illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing by the PRC, poses to all of our South Pacific allies?
Absolutely, Senator. As you note, illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing is a major challenge throughout the region, and not just in the Pacific Islands. I mean, what you see up and down the Indo-Pacific is PRC fishing fleets, associated maritime militia, moving en masse to rich fishing grounds, engaging in sort of industrial scale sort of catches. Again,
Primarily trawling and long lines.
Precisely. Yeah. And this has a huge impact. It certainly depletes fishery stocks in fragile ecosystems. It has a outsized economic impact, obviously crowding out sort of indigenous fishermen and fishing industries in these areas.
Yeah, the irony of what I saw in the area around Kwajalein was the inability, due to largely lack of fuel in particular, for local communities to be able to access a very rich fishing resource, yet you had pirate fishing coming in that was absolutely devastating and of a scale that was nothing like the traditional local use. Are there opportunities, as we have this broader conversation around remote sensing and in particular cooperation with the U.S. Coast Guard, to get a better handle on pirate fishing across the South Pacific?
It's absolutely a focus area for the Department of Defense, and and a focus of our security assistance in the area. We've allocated $20 million to help build partner capacity and enhance maritime domain awareness. So it will absolutely remain a priority.
It seems like there's a real opportunity there with what we can see even from just commercial satellite imagery these days, to not just patrol, but to have our our capabilities, our resources, when we can do partnership with these various governments, to have them in the right place to actually intercept that pirate fishing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And now we're going to have, let's see what you're, Senator Rono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm really glad that, Mr. Chairman, you are having this hearing on the importance of our relationship with our friends, the freely associated states. While the United States accepted responsibility to compensate the people of the Marshall Islands, and not fully, by the way, as, so I do share the concerns that Senator Heinrich expressed. On March 1st, in honor of Nuclear Victims Remembrance Day in the Marshall Islands, Senator Markey and I introduced a resolution formally apologizing to the people of the Republic of the Marshall Islands for the U.S. nuclear testing program and affirming the importance of the Compact of Free Association. This is for all of our witnesses. Does the administration support formally apologizing to the people and government of the Republic of the Marshall Islands for the damages caused by our country's nuclear testing program? Start with you, Mr. Lambert, and then we'll just go down the line.
Senator, we do acknowledge that our nuclear testing caused tremendous devastation in the Marshall Islands. As to your specific question, do we support a formal apology? I honestly don't know the answer to that, but I will try to get you the answer to that.
Senator, likewise, I would say the United States has recognized the effects of our nuclear testing program and has accepted and acted on our responsibility to the people of the RMI. And on the question of the apology, I think we're happy to take that back.
Mr. Nakoa?
Aloha kakahiaka, Senator Hirono. With regard to the bigger picture, as Das Lambert and Das Mohandris has said, the United States has recognized its responsibility and its role in significant aspects of the nuclear testing legacy. And I think apologies and what possibilities should be on the table. And as Das Lambert kind of mentioned, we want to ensure that we're able to hear from the RMI on what kinds of provisions and what things that they would like to propose in terms of things being left out. And with that in mind, apology, I just don't want to make sure that we're just doing an apology alone. But with regard to the specific legislation, I can have our office take a more close assessment of it and get back to you.
Frankly, I don't consider that your response is particularly encouraging because, and especially for Mr. Nakoi, I think you do recognize the importance of apologies, just as the United States apologized to the Native Hawaiian community for the unjustified overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy. So these kinds of, and I can't just say it's a symbolic gesture, but it's very meaningful to not only accept responsibility, although again, not fully compensating, but it is very important to the peoples of these nations that that we formally apologize. And so I would very much like all of you to get back to me as to why we cannot support a formal apology. And Mr. Lambert, I agree with you that we can't take the goodwill generated from our historic bonds of friendship with the FAS people for granted. So I'd say that it's long past time. One more thing. As you probably know, that in the so-called Welfare Reform Act in 1993, the COFA citizens who can come to our country without the need for a visa because of our special relationship with them through our compacts, that they were excluded from their ability to qualify for Medicaid, for example, as well as so many other kinds of resources. And so there is a bill that would enable the COFA citizens to access other benefits. And I'd like to know what the administration's posture is with regard to enabling the COFA citizens in our country to access these other programs. I think you know what I'm referring to, what kind of programs. So again, why don't we go down the line?
Senator, again, I apologize. I don't know the answer to that question, what the administration's position is on providing citizens of these three countries Medicare and other sorts of benefits. We can certainly get you the answer to that.
Well, it took me only about 10 years to restore Medicaid eligibility for them. Doctor?
Senator, this is not specifically an issue that the Department of Defense would opine on, so I would defer to my State and Interior colleagues.
Mr. Nakua?
You know, Senator Hirono, I think your leadership on this issue with the passage of the Medicaid expansion was critical. I met with DHS Director Kathy Betts when I was in Honolulu last year, and she said that the impact of that legislation and the expansion of benefits for the COFA population community in Hawaii has been incredible. I think they increased the amount of enrollees by 100%. Unfortunately, again, I will have to take a closer look at the specific legislation, so I don't get ahead of myself or my colleagues. But we will absolutely have my office take a closer look at your legislation and get your response on our posture.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, just one note on the eligibility of COFA citizens for various programs. That exclusion was done without any basis that I could find in the legislative history. So I think it's really important that we restore their eligibility for other programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you. And I also want to thank Senator Hirono for all of her work in such an important work here. As you can tell, gentlemen, the concern here is there this notion that the United States has neglected the freely associated states to the point that now we have the PRC taking advantage of that neglect. And there is a time now for us to do something about it. I understand the White House has appointed the ambassador. You've mentioned this earlier, Ambassador Yoon. Can either of you, or any of you, all three of you, expand on the current negotiations between the administration and the freely associated states, and how this recent appointment will contribute to your department's efforts? And Mr. Lambert, let me start with you.
Well, let me take all three countries separately because the response is a bit different for each of them. We have been in regular talks with Micronesia, for instance. They've never been severed. Our lead negotiator met with the Micronesians as recently as March 16. Our roadblock, frankly, has been with the other two countries. With Republic of Marshall Islands, we've made clear through our ambassador there that we're ready for formal negotiations. We have not received a response back. A similar situation exists in Palau, but both those countries seem to be very happy that we have appointed a presidential envoy. Frankly, we're pretty optimistic that we will be able to resume formal negotiations in the very near term. Ambassador Yoon began work yesterday. He's already doing the rounds here in Washington. He's meeting with the representatives at those three countries' embassies here in Washington. Two of those countries are still closed because of COVID, but our hope is that Ambassador Yoon is on a plane very, very soon and actually going to see people in all three countries face to face to push forward the negotiations.
Thank you. Doctor?
So, Senator, as you know, the defense provisions of the COFA are not up for renegotiation, only the economic assistance provisions. And so for that reason, the Department of Defense is not directly involved in the negotiation process, but we are absolutely committed to supporting Ambassador Yoon in any way that he requires for the negotiations, including in particular by making the case for the strategic importance of the COFA states, both internally and externally, including in forums like this one.
Mr. Nakua?
Thank you, Senator. And as Das Lambert just said, I think it is a little bit of a different situation among the three FAS. With FSM, as he mentioned, we have been continuing to have technical discussions around federal programs and services. We've just recently as I think a couple weeks ago, we met with the FSM and USPS to discuss USPS's ongoing operations in the FSM, and that was a very productive and enlightening meeting, I believe, for the FSM side. USPS has been an issue that all three of the FAS have highlighted as very important, and so we're happy to be moving forward on that. with the RMI, as Das Lambert said, there's been a little bit of a different posture. But from the readouts that we've received from the Ambassador Cabral delivering the messages that we have Ambassador Yun on board, it was very positive. And, we're hoping to have some meetings with the lead negotiator this week, but unfortunately that wasn't possible. So we'll look to continue to have some meetings with him shortly. But Ambassador Yun will lead some meetings with him hopefully soon. And then with Palau, I was just out there last week. And I was able to be in the room when Ambassador Hennessy Nyland and I gave him the news of Ambassador Yun's appointment, and he received that very well. It also, seemed like the information about the mandatory spending that was tied into the president's budget yesterday was very well received as well. So with all of the recent steps from the administration, again, it does look like we will be able to get back to the table very soon. And Ambassador Yun has, is just getting his legs under him in terms of this new job, but he has a wealth of experience, in the region. And so I look forward to working closely with him and supporting him as the lead representative from the Interior.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And I have one further question, and then if any of our other senators would like to have another question, we'll stay here. So with that, I'm going to say, Senator Barrasso and I have sent 2 letters to both Secretary Haaland and Secretary Blinken, urging the administration to expedite negotiation process for renewing the expiring provisions in the compacts of free association. So we welcome the appointment of Special Presidential Envoy for compact negotiations, which we hope will prioritize timely completion of negotiations with the freely associated states. The most successful negotiators that produced the compacts of free association were based on the executive office of the president, and they had state, defense, and Interior Department staff, and were given written negotiating authorities by the president through the National Security Council that conferred all of government authority. We know the administration has responsibility for conducting negotiations, and we respect that. But we in Congress would like to be as supportive as we can. So, Mr. Lambert, will the envoy have the authority to fully negotiate all of the issues, including continued federal programs and services such as the U.S. Postal Service and the National Weather Service?
Senator Manchin, Ambassador Yun will be empowered to discuss anything that the 3 states wish to discuss.
Can you tell us if the new special presidential envoy will have received interdepartmental support and interagency staffing?
Yes, sir, he has.
Mr. Nagoa, how will you and the Department of Interior work with the envoy on compact negotiations? Will Interior contribute personnel to the envoy's team?
Yes, we intend to carry out be as helpful as we can as Ambassador Yun sets up his shop. And I intend to remain closely involved as a lead representative from the Interior. And I, in close conversations with state, NSC, and some of the other interagency, it is my understanding and expectation that Interior will remain closely involved as we have a long relationship with all 3 of the FAS. And that personally, I will continue to lead the Interior team. I have 2 staff that are completely devoted or will be chiefly devoted for the negotiations. And so I'm ready and able to dedicate all personnel that is needed to support Ambassador Yun's mission.
Thank you. And Dr. Mohandas, how will you and the Department of Defense work with the envoy on compact negotiations? Will the department be formally engaged in negotiations? Will it contribute personnel to the envoy's team?
Senator, as Das Lambert noted, Ambassador Yun just began work yesterday, so I think he's still in a process of figuring out what his requirements are. What I will say is the Department of Defense has fulfilled every request made by the current negotiating team, and we absolutely commit to supporting Ambassador Yun going forward, and in particular, continuing to make the case for the strategic importance of the COFA states.
As a committee, we would like to get a formal reply back from your all agencies on what you all intend to support and how you're going to support to what level as quickly as possible.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Thank you. Senator Barrasso.
Just one question, and Mr. McCall, I ran out of time in my first round. I wanted to ask you, what happens if the compact negotiations aren't completed in 2022 or in time for Congress, to pass a budget that includes economic assistance for the Republic of the Marshall Islands and for the federal states of Micronesia, in the fiscal year 2024 coming up.
Thank you, Senator. I don't want to jinx or get out ahead of Ambassador Yun's work, but at the same time, understand that it's important to understand what all contingencies look like.
Yeah, just ask about options that are out there. Yeah.
Sure. And in the event that we are not able to conclude the negotiations by the end of 2023 or 2024 with Palau, the current compacts have certain mechanisms built in for the FSM and RMI that would mean that they would revert to the disbursements from the compact trust funds. There is still work to be done from the compact trust fund committees in terms of what those disbursements would or could look like, as well as what the longevity of the compact trust funds and the strategy around that will be. But that is work that would have to be done in the event that we are not able to create a better outcome through the negotiations. And I would also add that Congress also has plenary authority to take action.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Rono.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question. This is for Mr. Nakoa and Mr. Lambert. It is my understanding that the administration still has not confirmed that certain U.S. programs will continue to operate in the FAS after fiscal year 2023 and 2024. This includes critical services like the Postal Service, supplemental education grants, and FEMA disaster assistance. Does the administration support the continued operation of these programs and services in the freely associated states in the upcoming compact negotiations?
Senator, not to split hairs, but the compact negotiations themselves are one thing. These other services are something else. But I would like to emphasize that Ambassador Yun will be empowered to hear out all concerns that all three parties have. And we will then, of course, need to work with the interagency and with Congress to fulfill those requests.
So if the programs that I talked about will not be the subject of the compact negotiations, then does the administration support continuing these programs regardless?
I know I personally do.
Okay. Put your best efforts forward.
Yes,
Mr. Nakoa, do you share that sentiment?
Yes, and I would just say that we have been working in the interagency to find solutions, and we hope to honestly work with the FAS to find more creative solutions to meet all needs or requests as they become up in terms of the negotiation. As Das Lambert has very much stressed today, Ambassador Yun will be empowered to hear any proposal from the FAS. And so, unfortunately, I haven't been able to have those conversations thus far with the FAS, but I look forward to Ambassador Yun's leadership and us being able to be in a position with the negotiations to start creating solutions and working to find how to best, figure out ways to enable federal services that benefit both the United States and the FAS.
I think it's really important to continue the programmatic support that we have been, but at the same time, I hope that we can use these negotiations or in some other context, for example, to expand access to broadband, telemedicine for our FAS partners, because these are nations that could use a lot more support in a lot more areas from us, and especially as we're talking about China extending its so-called hand of friendship, but mainly it's to expand their sphere of influence in these countries. So I hope we can also bring to the discussion ways to help the FAS countries modernize their systems and platforms. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I want to thank you all for your testifying today and helping us better understand what challenges we have ahead of us. So I recognize it is in our best interest to prioritize the compact negotiations, as this sends a strong signal to our allies about the importance of maintaining a strong and close relationship with the freely associated states and to ensure that we are doing our best to deter Chinese expansion in the Pacific. I have previously said that this committee has a responsibility to look ahead to the problems that may arise if the financial assistance afforded by the compacts comes to an end. We will continue to monitor the status of the compact negotiations, and at some point in the future, we would like to invite Ambassador Yoon, the newly appointed Special Presidential Envoy for compact negotiations, to come testify before our committee. Members are going to have until the close of business tomorrow to submit additional questions for the record. Committee stands adjourned.